The useState hook is the most commonly used React hook, and every React developer must know how to use it. In this video, I'll teach you how to use the useState hook. On my screen, I have a basic React app created with Vite. I recommend you do the same thing for yourself so that you can follow along. Inside our index.css file, we will delete every style, and also for our app.css file, we'll delete every style. This is because we will not be using them. This video will focus solely on how to use the useState hook. In the app component, let's delete the default app component and create a new one. Good. Let's return an H1 that says our component. So, what is a hook? A hook is a built-in function that allows us to access React features. It's a built-in function in React that allows us to access React's features. So then, what is the useState hook? A useState hook is a hook that allows us to update a component state. It can also be defined as a special built-in function in React that allows us to access a component state and make changes to it. So, with that said, what is the state? A state is any value in our component that changes over time. So, I'll demonstrate this with an example. Back in VS Code, let's create a counter app example. To do that, we'll replace this H1 with a fragment. So let's close that off properly. Good. And in between our fragments, our counter app is going to have two buttons. Let's make sure to put the right symbols in between our buttons. Good. Now, in between our buttons, we would have a span which would wrap our count variable. We will create our count variable shortly in our component file. Let's have our const count equals 0. Good. So we see it working there. Let's format this document properly. In this example, the expected behavior of our app here is that when we click on a button, it would change this count variable and display the updated value in the UI. We can do that by, first of all, setting an onClick property to one of our buttons, and we'll call the function decrease. This decrease function would decrease our count by 1. Let's not forget to pass the count variable into the decrease function here. Now let's go ahead and define our decrease function. We'll accept a parameter here which would call count, and inside our function body we'll set count to be equal to the count received minus 1. Good. Let's now log count to the console. So with this setup, we can expect that when we mistakenly imported something at the top here, so we just get rid of that. Good. With this setup, we can expect that when we click on this button, it should decrease our count by 1 and update or display the latest count value in the UI, but this does not happen. Let's take a look to our console to see the value logged there. Let's refresh to take out those error messages because it has already been fixed. And when we click on the button, we see that -1, which is the latest value of this count, is logged to the console. However, it is not displayed in our UI. This is because whenever our function component here runs for the first time, this value of count, which is 0, is what is rendered. Now, when we click on the button and the value of count is changed, it does not cause React to re-render this app component. Rather, the value is only changed and it remains the same in the UI. To go about this, this is where the useState hook comes into play. With the useState hook, we are able to store values as state values. And in React, when a state value changes, the whole component is re-rendered. Therefore, in the second re-rendering, we would use the latest state of the value. Let's take an example to get a better understanding. So let's look at how we can use the useState hook in React. To use the useState hook, the first step is to import the hook. So at the top of our function component, we would import the useState hook like this. Good. Now that we have imported the useState hook, we can now use it in our function component. Recall that the useState hook is a special built-in function in React. The keyword there is that a hook is a function, right? And so likewise is the useState hook. It is a function. So this is very key to understand how it works and how to use it. You must understand that the useState hook is a function. Back in VS Code, if we are going to use the useState hook, because it is a function, we have to first of all call it, and we would call it like any other regular function. So we'd have the useState and then followed by the parenthesis. Good. Having called the useState hook, it accepts a value or a parameter which it sets as the initial value of the state we are storing. So inside this parenthesis, we can provide our initial count value, which is 0. Boom. So this line of code here helps us to call the useState hook and set an initial value for our state variable or state value, whichever one you prefer, So this line here on line 4 successfully stores a value as a state value. Now let's look at how we can read the values from the state or the useState. Recall that the useState is a function, and functions can either return a value or not. The useState hook or function returns an array with 2 values. The first value is the current state value. The second value is a state updating function that enables us to update the current state value. We can see this array returned by the useState when it is called by simply logging useState to the console. So we have console.log useState. Now, if we were to change this initial value to 5, and let's go back to our browser, refresh, and boom, there we have it. We have the array returned by the useState function. This is an array of 2 elements, and the first one at index 0 is the current state value, in this case our initial state. We haven't made any changes to it yet, so it would be our initial state as well as the current state. The second value is a function, And this function is the state updating function. What it does is that it enables us to update this current value at the index of 0. So let's go back into our code and see how we can use them. Before we do that, notice that the value returned here is an array. Therefore, if we take out this console.log statement, we can destructure that array, and because of our example, we'll call the first value count, and we'll call the function returned, which is the state updating function set count. By convention, the state updating function is named with the prefix of set. So because our value variable here is called count, we would conventionally name our state updating function set count. Let's comment this line of code out of there so that we don't get that error message, and then when we refresh, the error message is cleared. Now we are successfully reading this count value here from state, and we did that by distracting the current state value from the array returned by the useState. Good. It can be assumed that when we click on this button now, our state is going to update in the UI, even though the value is updated and logged to the console. It is not updated in the UI, because in order for the value to be updated, this for to be updated in the UI, React has to re-evaluate this function component here and use the latest values to output the UI. In order to cause or trigger a re-rendering or re-evaluation of our function component, we have to use this state updating function. So let's comment out these lines of code here, and right beneath them we would call the state updating function like this. Now inside the parentheses, we'll pass in the new value which we want our state to be updated with. In this case, because we are using the decrease function, we would reduce our state by 1. And if we click on our button now, we see that the value there has been changed from 5 to 4, and it matches with the current value over here in our console.log statement. If we click on it again, we see 3, right? And that's that. Let's run. Boom, 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 boom. State is being updated. Exactly. Good. So we've seen how to store a value in state. We've seen how to read a value from state, and we've seen how to change a value from state. Good. Now, a very key thing I would like you to know is that even though this code works, it is not the best way to change our state value. The best way to change our state values is to use an arrow function to update the value. Now, the state updating function, which is this set count here, automatically provides the previous state. So we can accept that as a parameter, and inside our arrow function right here, we would use the previous count for our state updation. And if we click on it, this still works. Let's refresh. Click, 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 boom. We have the same result. This is the best way to do it. Good. So we have seen how we can update simple values. Now, let's look at how we can update arrays and objects stored as state values. So let's imagine we want to store an object which represents a person as a state value, and it has a name property which has a value of John, and an age property which has a value of, let's say, 20, right? This value has been stored in state, and in order to access the values, let's destructure the array returned by useState. We would call the values person and the state updating function set persons. This is a normal convention often used in React projects. So now we have our person. Let's change this to set person, a singular, and we have our person object here, and let's use that in our file. Right beneath that, let's render a p tag which would say my name is. Then from our person's object, we'll do person dot name. So my name is John. I am person dot age years old. Now refresh here, and we have our values rendering correctly. If we want to update that age value here, this is how we are going to go about it. Before we do that, let's create a button and give it an onClick property, but the text will be increase age, like this. Good. And we'll give it an onClick property, and we'll call the increase age function. Let's now define our increase age function, and in order to update the state of our object, we first have to call the state updating function, and inside that state updating function, we'll update our state using an arrow function. So we receive the previous state here, previous person here, as a parameter, and in our function body, what we would do is that we would return an object, and in that object we'll first of all copy every element from our previous state, right? And then we will now go ahead to make the changes. Previous person dot age, and we'll set that to previous person, which was the previous age, plus 1, just like this, right? Oh, sorry. Good. Now this way our state would be changed properly. When we click here, let's refresh so that we can take out those error messages here, because we have solved them already. And if we click on it, boom, we see that our state is updated successfully. So anytime we have an object or an array stored in state, we first of all have to return either an object or an array and copy the previous values using the spread operator before we can make our change. That's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. Happy coding, and I'll see you in the next one.